Okay, this video lesson is part 2 for the endocrine system. The first part dealt with an introduction, talking about the different types of glands, so exocrine versus endocrine glands, the types of hormones, how they're classified, and how they act or how they work when they get to the target cell. So that's the steroid and non-steroid hormones. How they are regulated through negative feedback mechanisms, and then we touched on or just introduced different glands and talked about the pituitary gland and how it was the master gland. We didn't go into great detail about it and jobs. So this one will focus more on the pituitary gland, and then we'll do another one probably that has more information about other glands. So these are meant for you to be able to use as support, or if you're not able to understand. One of the guided questions is asking about factors that can disrupt normal endocrine functions. So they include things like tumors or infections, autoimmune diseases, physical injury, genetic disorders, pollutants, or even food additives that you might take in when you're eating things. Ways they can be treated. If you have an endocrine disorder, it might be treated through hormone replacement therapy. So if it's causing too little of a certain hormone, then it may be as simple as taking a synthetic version of that hormone, or other medications that might help to moderate the endocrine activity of that gland. It may mean a change in diet or other form of behavioral change, or it may even require surgery. Maybe a certain section of the endocrine tissue may have to be removed, and if that was the case, then you probably have to also supplement with hormone replacement therapy. Sometimes it's hard to tell, and I certainly don't expect you to know all of them, but sometimes it's hard to tell whether a hormone is steroid or non-steroid just from their name. The steroid ones, some of them are a little bit easier in that if they end in "erone," like testosterone or progesterone, things like that, or if they end in "oid," then they would be easily identified as steroid hormones. Now, a few examples of the non-steroid hormones we saw in the first video lesson. Adrenaline acts as a non-steroid hormone. It's made of bits of protein, so amino acids. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, is another, which is released by the pituitary gland. Glucagon, the pancreatic hormones. Luteinizing hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, and antidiuretic hormone are all non-steroid or protein hormones. So they act by binding to a receptor on the outside of the cell and causing reactions to happen inside. So this was one of the slides that you saw when we looked in the first video lesson. It highlighted the fact that there's two lobes to the pituitary gland. There's one that's more towards your eyes, so the anterior lobe towards the front of your head. It actually produces 6 hormones and releases them, so we briefly mentioned them. The posterior lobe, the one towards the back of your head, it doesn't produce hormones, but it stores hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus and releases them. So that's ADH and oxytocin. So this is the diagram from your book that we also took a quick look at. And this is the schematic diagram that kind of shows you all of the hormones and their activities on their target cells. So to focus on this diagram, you should have a black and white version of it as a handout. If you don't, then it's there in the class notes page that you can print out. So this is saying the pituitary gland has 2 lobes, the anterior lobe and the posterior lobe. And the anterior lobe, like we said, produces these 6 hormones. and releases them when the body requires them. So the first is growth hormone, or somatotropin, and it acts on most cells of the body, especially bones and muscles, and causes growth. So hence the name growth hormone. The second is ACTH, so adrenocorticotropic hormone. So it tells you right in the name which gland and what part of the gland it acts on. So adrenocortical, so adrenal gland, the cortex of the adrenal gland is what it acts on, and it causes it to produce its corticosteroids, like cortisol. So another corticosteroid it produces is aldosterone, but we'll talk about those when we get to the adrenal cortex. Cortisol acts on the muscles, the liver, and fatty tissue in order to try and increase the overall amount of glucose that's available in responding to times of stress. So the muscles will release amino acids into the blood, the liver will take those amino acids and convert them to glucose, and the fatty tissues will release fatty acids into the blood to provide another source of energy. Now, the third hormone that we'll talk about, produced by the anterior lobe, is TSH, and it stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. So it obviously acts on the thyroid gland, so it travels in the blood, goes to the thyroid gland, and gets the thyroid gland to produce its thyroid hormone, as we sometimes might refer to it. So that's triiodothyronine and thyroxine, and the thyroxine is converted to the triiodothyronine to be active. They both will, because one is converted to the other, they both have the same overall effect, which is to act on most cells and increase metabolism. So they cause them to basically break down more food and provide energy for the cells to do their work, but in the process, that releases heat as well. Okay, so it increases metabolism, and a lot of times it will be released in higher amounts when your body's growing so that your body can grow and develop. But its main effect is through the metabolism. The fourth one we'll talk about is FSH. So that stands for follicle stimulating hormone. So think follicle stimulating is going to stimulate development of the follicles. So that's what it does in females in their ovaries. Okay, so the eggs are developing inside of what we call follicles in the ovaries. So it basically causes development of the follicles and also the eggs within them. Counterpart in the testes, so in the male, since they don't have follicles, does cause development of sperm. The fifth one also acts on the testes and ovaries. This is called luteinizing hormone, and it's called that because in the ovaries it causes basically ovulation and subsequent development of the corpus luteum. So luteinizing because it causes development of the corpus luteum. This is basically what we get when the follicles kind of breaks down. So the corpus luteum produces the two female hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen causes development of secondary female characteristics, okay, like increased breast, development of the ovaries, hair in certain regions of the body, all those things that come along with puberty. Progesterone kind of starts out similar to pregnancy, which is what it helps a lot with. So every month it helps to prepare the uterus as though it was going to have a pregnancy. So it helps to maintain the uterine lining. It will help to maintain the pregnancy. And if a pregnancy happens, then it inhibits ovulation from happening again. Because you don't want to have more than one. Sometimes it does happen, but normally we're meant to have one at a time. In the testes, luteinizing hormone causes production of testosterone, which is the male hormone responsible for development of secondary male characteristics like hair and the chest, arms, legs, genital area, development of the Adam's apple, growth, enlargement of the penis, all male characteristics to become ready to reproduce. The last of the ones produced by the anterior lobe is PRL, which stands for prolactin. So if you remember to lactate would be to produce milk. Lactose is milk sugar, so that's where that word is coming from. So anyway, it causes mammary glands, so it travels in the blood and causes the mammary glands to produce milk. So that is the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Posterior lobe, as we said, it stores two hormones that are produced by the hypothalamus. So the first of these we'll talk about is oxytocin, and oxytocin actually travels in the blood and causes the uterus to, the muscles that line the uterus to start contractions, so it would be released in times of labor. It travels at the same time to the mammary glands in order to cause letting of milk. So when the baby is ready to start drinking, the mammary glands will be stimulated with the release of oxytocin in order to release the milk. The other one that's released by the posterior gland, stored and released from there, is ADH. This one we talked about in chapter 11 when we covered the excretory system. And it travels to the kidneys and causes reabsorption of more water. Okay, so we'll watch this little animation.
The pituitary gland, protected deep within the middle of the head, is often referred to as the master gland of the body, since it regulates many activities of other endocrine glands. Let's take a closer look at an enlarged view. Located above the pituitary gland is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus decides which hormones the pituitary should release by sending it either hormonal or electrical messages. If the hypothalamus released the growth hormone releasing hormone, or GHRH, the pituitary would release growth hormone that would affect the body tissues. Growth hormone acts on muscle and bone, increasing the size of both. If a person receives insufficient growth hormone during childhood, he would have a condition called pituitary dwarfism. If he had received too much growth hormone as a child, he would have a condition called gigantism.
Still singing?
Too much growth hormone exerting its effect on a body that has already matured physically results in a condition called acromegaly. Facial features become rough and coarse, the voice becomes deeper, and hand, foot, and skull size expands. In response to hormonal commands from the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland releases a hormone called thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH. TSH stimulates the thyroid gland to release its own hormones, called T3 and T4. These hormones travel through the bloodstream to stimulate metabolism in other cells throughout the body. The pituitary can also release a hormone called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, that affects the production of urine. ADH is produced in the hypothalamus and is transported to the pituitary where it is stored. When the pituitary releases ADH, it delivers a message to the kidneys, causing them to become water conservation minded. The kidneys then absorb more of the fluid that passes through. As a result, less urine is produced. Because alcohol inhibits the release of ADH by the pituitary, drinking beer or other alcoholic beverages results in increased urine production. The pituitary gland produces other hormones as well: follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, and luteinizing hormone, or LH, are hormones which affect the ovaries and egg production. In the case for men, these same hormones affect the testes and sperm production. Prolactin is a hormone that affects breast tissue in nursing mothers. ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone, causes the adrenal glands to produce important substances that have properties similar to steroids. Growth, puberty, baldness, even sensations like hunger and thirst are just a few examples of the processes that are under the influence of the endocrine system.
Okay, so the first of the hormones from the pituitary gland that we did talk about was growth hormone, human growth hormone. Its other name is somatotropin. Again, we said it causes growth, especially in muscles and bones, growth and development of tissues. So in so doing, these are some of the other things that it causes to happen. It is a non-steroid hormone, so it has to bind to receptors on the cell membrane and cause reactions to happen inside to grow. And we produce less of it as we age. There are a few disorders that you're responsible for that have to do with levels of growth hormone. The first two are fairly straightforward in understanding. So dwarfism happens, one cause for it is low secretion of growth hormone during childhood. So if it's lower than normal, then the bones are going to end up being shorter than they normally would. So normally our bones will grow from the growth plate and they grow lengthwise. So if there's not enough, then the person would be abnormally short and have smaller hands and feet. If, on the other hand, there's too much during childhood, then we end up with a condition known as gigantism, which is the opposite, where the bones would grow abnormally long, so they would end up being really, really tall with long hands and feet, really long digits. Acromegaly is another condition where there's too much growth hormone, but this is when there's too much after the growth plates have fused. So after they won't grow lengthwise anymore, it causes them instead to grow widthwise. So the bones of the jaw and forehead and digits will grow widthwise instead. So these are some pictures depicting the different conditions. Of course, this is a person of normal height, and these people, this man in this picture and the woman down here, both have gigantism. The person in the middle of this group has gigantism, but she also had acromegaly. So her high levels of growth hormone continued after her growth plates fused. This person had acromegaly as well. It's just showing their feet and the digits and how when they grow in width, how their facial features and their hands and feet tend to have wider bones than normal. The last pictures are showing people who have dwarfism. And dwarfism can be caused by different things, but in this case we were talking about dwarfism caused by too little growth hormone during childhood. Okay, the next slides, I believe, talk about other glands, so we'll wait and go into more detail about them on the next